doctors with us. Appreciate y'all coming today, and appreciate me and Jay. You want your own handout to me?
No, I'm all right. Wait.
Yeah. They're sort of used to.
I can share.
Yeah, we can share.
Okay, I mean, I got more if people want handouts. We've been working on a class on Christian evidences this quarter, and the reason about that is it's all about faith. Hebrews 11:1-3 tells us, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the people of old received their commendation. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the Word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. So it's all about faith, and that we have to believe, and in fact folks that don't believe in creation, those that believe in evolution, have to have faith in things they didn't see either. So no one was around at that point. We also are told in 1 Peter 3:15 to be prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. So we should be ready with a defense. And last week we were talking about, we kind of worked through some different topics about sort of the Big Bang, and then we got into, last week, we talked some about how we see our body and how it shows a great designer. That our body is not just a random thing that evolved through time. And we can see that when we look at the body's tissues. We've got hundreds of kinds of muscles and billions of muscle fibers. Some of them are automatic, some of them are what they call voluntary. You know, you move your arms, and some of that is about like your heart and your intestines and stuff. They just run on autopilot, and it's an excellent design. Sir Isaac Newton remarked, in the absence of any other proof, the thumb alone would convince me of God's existence. When you think about how, you know, something as simple as your thumb, but it's not just, you know, without it, the ability to do things would be much harder. So, and then you look at the body's organs, the eye. It was even Charles Darwin, who, you know, the big evolutionist that wrote The Origin of Species. He stated there, it's indented on the page, to suppose the eye with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for correcting of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest sense. And maybe you could explain to us what chromatic aberration and spherical aberration is, if you wanted to.
They plague me.
Yes.
Anyway.
A camera, even $1,000 camera, has issues. You know, when you have light go through a lens, it diffracts. It's like when you see a prism. You've seen a prism in light and what that does. Well, a lens does that. That's just the properties of light. Your eye does that. But your eye and your brain corrects for all of that. We don't see little rainbow outlines around all of the people in the room. And it's just part of the design. We also spoke some about the human ear and how complicated it is. And again, if you looked at a phone system for the city of Paducah, and you'd say, okay, to make the phones in Paducah work, it took a team of designers to come up with the system for this to work. Well, how would your ear just at random evolve? And the answer is no, it would not. It required a master designer. So we want to move on the second handout, the case for the existence of God, the human body's great designer, and the systems. Okay, so One of the systems that we'll talk about is our skeletal system. An average adult has 206 bones. A baby has more. They fuse together when they're growing as an infant. Bones are about 15% of your body's weight, and it works with hundreds of muscles. There are different kinds of bones. There's what they call long bones and short bones, and then one has to joke about the ankle bone. But you have irregular bones like your vertebrae, and bones they're not just super strong for their weight, but they have to be not just super stiff, they have to be flexible as well. Otherwise, you could do something, and yeah, you can do things now and break a bone. You can break, how many people in here have broke a bone? You can do that, but it's harder to do than you would expect. If you made your bones were too flexible, you couldn't lift heavy objects. But our bones can lift heavy weights and light weights. They can control your hand has incredible design function. They serve as levers, but they're more than rigid, lifeless structures. It's not just like 2x4s holding your house up, okay? They have, the bone marrow is spongy. It's part of that, it makes them lighter, but it also is constantly being remodeled. In other words, if you became a weightlifter, you started saying, I'm gonna go to the gym every day and I'm gonna be a big weightlifter, your bones will get thicker. They have to. Because somebody that lifts, I don't know, how much can someone lift?
500 pounds.
500 pounds?
A lot of people lift their body weight,
Right? But if you went out and tried to pick up 500 pounds, I would be like mashed, right? And you could break bones and you could hurt yourself. But your body, not only do your muscles build up, but your bones will become thicker and stronger. So even designers of buildings or things, vehicles, don't have them where they adapt as they, the guy that designed the pickup truck sitting outside, the truck doesn't make itself stronger because you start carrying heavy loads in it. It is what it is. We had a great designer in God. So our bones are strong, they're elastic, they serve as levers. If you think about a runner, sometimes Stuart and Donna in here, Stuart's a big time runner. Your bones cushion your legs from the forces of running. And it's just amazing technology. It is not the result of random chance. It is the result of a master designer. So the next thing we want to talk about some is the circulatory system. So your heart, your body has cells, and then you move up from cells to tissues to different organs to systems. And so our circulatory system has all our blood vessels in our heart and all of that in it. So the circulatory system is transporting, it's not just, you think about pumping blood around, that's transporting food around your body for your muscles and everything. It's transporting oxygen, which is important. It also takes waste away from your muscles and goes to your kidneys, and then it's filtered out. So in an adult male, the heart weighs about 11 ounces, and it's about the size of a fist. Typically, a woman's heart is slightly smaller, but that's questionable. It probably acts like it's bigger. It's like a pump with a built-in motor. Beats about 70 to 80 times per minute when you're sitting around. Some people's resting heart rate's a little lower than that. But it can go like 150 to 180 beats per minute if you get to exercising, if you're doing hard work. So it was stated that the heart and blood vessels do more than speed or slow our blood flow to meet the body's needs. They carry the scarlet stream to different tissues under different pressures to fuel different actions. Blood rushes to the stomach when you eat, to the lungs and muscles when you swim, to the brain when we read. To satisfy these changing metabolic needs, the cardiovascular system integrates information as well as any computer, then responds as no computer can. So our system adjusts better than a computer or a design system like that would. So our heart beats about 100,000 times a day, 40,000 times a year, no, 40 million times a year, and pumps about 1,800 to 2,000 gallons of blood a day, or 680,000 gallons a year. It's a lot of blood pumped around. Okay, there's different parts of the heart that, again, design-wise are beyond what a human designer would think of or what we would get to by just an evolutionary process. It's self-lubricating. It has its own separate blood supply, even though it's pumping blood. And then you think about the pressures it has to deal with. When your heart contracts, okay, I have to look what that's called. There's distal, and there's systole. So when the heart relaxes, it's known as distal. And so if you take your blood pressure, you know, it's probably, I don't know, about 70. When it's the low number, and the top number should be what, 120? Something like that, is that right?
120 over 60
Well,
is
you
perfect.
start getting too high and then you go into atrial fib and all sorts of good stuff.
Right. I mean, I know I take medicine to control mine, so mine is too high. Okay, so we have to have blood to deal with all of our different activities. It's more complicated than that, because if you think about your heart's up here and it's pumping blood like up to your head, and it pumps it out to your feet, but to get back to up to your heart, there's like little one-way valves all along your blood, your veins, to keep the blood moving back. And your veins actually contract and help pump blood too, which I thought was kind of cool. So they help push the blood back. So arteries carry blood from your heart out to your extremes. Veins carry it back. We have about 60 to 100,000 miles worth of various types of blood vessels. So we got a bunch. It's a very efficient system. Your body can provide blood. Every cell in your body is serviced with blood in about every 20 seconds. So it pumps it around very quickly. This is beyond the capability of an engineering designer, and just hard to imagine that folks would look at these systems and think, well, that just happened. And maybe the most complex system of all is our nervous system, where it's a giant communications center. It's the brain, the spinal cord, the nerves. It has many functions. It regulates the action of a lot of your organs. It monitors your senses. It lets us think about stuff. Information travels through your body about 45 feet per second, or 30 miles an hour. And it travels as both electrical and chemical energy, something that like a computer doesn't do. If you took a single starfish, it's all of its nervous system of a starfish is more complicated than the telephone system in a city the size of London. And that's the nervous system of a starfish, not a person. we're estimated to have 100 billion neurons, 10 to the 11th. There's like 10,000 different kinds. So we've got all of these different types of neurons, and it's just a complicated system. It was stated by Sherwin Newland, though the 3 pounds representing our brain, a mere 2% of body weight of a 150-pound person, the quart full of brain is so metabolically, yeah, that sounds about right, active, that it uses 20% of the oxygen we take in through our lungs. So our brain is using, it's a small organ, but it uses 20% of our oxygen, and 15% of the blood from our aorta is going right to our brain. It's, takes a bunch of energy to power our brain. I think I read somewhere that our brain is about 20 watts. And you think, we're used to light bulbs being, 50 or 100 watts, and our brain's about 20 watts, which is cool. Dr. Tattersall stated, there's a huge amount that we don't know about our brain, including how a mass of chemical and electrical signals can give rise to such a complex effects of cognition and consciousness. Robert Jastrow of NASA stated, it is possible that man, with his remarkable powers of intellect and spirit, has been formed from the dust of the earth by chance alone. It is hard to accept that evolution of the human eye is a product of chance. It is even harder to accept the evolution of human intelligence as the product of random disruptions in the brain cells of our ancestors. Among the organs of the human body, none is more difficult than the brain to explain by evolution. The powers that reside in the brain make man a different animal from other animals. So it's massively connected, it's very complex. It contains about 100 trillion bits of information. So if you put that and wrote it in English in a library, it would be 20 million volumes. So your brain has the equivalent of 20 million books inside it.
What does a computer have? That man invented. You kind of wondered.
Well, this is 10 to the 11th,
That's a lot.
10 to the 14th bits. A Commodore 64 had 64K, so 64,000 bits. Now, of course, now your phone's got a lot more than that, it's megabytes of data, so millions of data, but this is 100 trillion amounts of data. So, yeah, a big computer doesn't hold this much.
I must have a real small computer.
You're running on like 19 watts instead of
Some of us have less than more.
I'm a little old.
Yeah.
Just think about how much your brain, or how much you do know.
You got that history in your brain.
And they, even all we know, they say that we just use a small fraction of our brain capability.
And the brain can rewire itself.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a stroke, the brain rewires itself to teach you how to walk and how to talk and how to use your hands and everything like they should again.
Right.
Autistic children usually have one specialty. And like some of them are geniuses in math, some of them are geniuses in music. That's because just one portion of their brain is working harder than the rest. And we probably all have that capability, but we just can't use it.
right?
Well, in the sense of Helen Keller, her senses overworked in one area. She was blind and dumb, and couldn't hear. And
Blind
Her
people
touch.
hear better, you know, if
Feel.
they've got the capability of hearing, they hear better than other people. Sometimes they can hear through walls if the walls aren't that thick. So,
I mean, I read that, like, you know, normal human brain weighs 3 pounds. They said Albert Einstein's brain was like 2.8 pounds.
huh,
So it's like,
that's interesting.
it's not like he had a big brain.
How tall was he?
I don't
How big
know.
of a person was he?
it's just how
Probably
you
smaller.
use it.
Yeah, so we've had scientists study the brain for centuries.
Big head.
And, you know, basically, it's obviously designed. We have folks that want to, not see it that way. I mean, you have, Dawkins would say, it's almost as if the human brain was specifically designed to misunderstand Darwinism and to find it hard to believe. I thought that was an interesting quote. And I'll finish this section with Romans 1:28. It's on the page there. And since they do not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done.
You know, if they think we all started from one little tiny thing, they've got to figure out how that little tiny thing have all these nervous systems and brains and eyes and ears and to start with. So it could evolve.
Well, it's, and that, the evolution case, we're gonna talk about it in a few weeks, so, we're not gonna get on that today. There's a bunch of topics, that we do have, and this is, you know, a series, and as we work through it, I was trying to, you know, this last section about the body and design is kind of technical, biologically technical. I'm not a biologist. But, you know, we've had a discussion a bit about the engineering side and the rules of science and the rules of, you know, rules of thermodynamics and how that applied to the universe. And then I was wanting to go into the next topic, which is, this last topic's not been so much Bible, but, you know, this is Bible class, so you should.
Well, it is Bible.
Right,
It is creation.
It is Bible related, but I want to talk some about, starting with page 9, that what about evil, pain, and suffering? So we're kind of transitioning, well, any comments or questions before we move to another topic?
It's interesting on the digestive system, when a new baby comes into the earth, and when it takes food, then that digestive expels it out to the body for nutrients and how fast a child grows within a 2-year span.
Mhm. I mean, it's interesting to think how, you know, how could you evolve, you know, how you almost had to have a design that you design, you know, Adam and Eve weren't babies. They had to be adult, they had to be able to take care of themselves. You know, you had to
True.
start in a place where things could be sustained.
I figured out something the other day, this is pretty smart for me. They always ask, you know, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, it had to be the chicken, because if the egg had been first, wouldn't have been a hen to sit on it, hatch.
Yes.
Some of
See,
it
I never thought
could-
that.
It wouldn't have made it to breakfast time, would it?
You was talking about the, not having a lot of scriptures to go along with that, but there are. I mean, if you go back and you look at the old law, God commanded the Israelites to circumcise on a certain day. that day that he had them circumcise them babies is the day when your body has the most vitamin K in its system that it'll ever
Yes,
have.
8th day.
And that makes your blood clot.
Mm-hmm.
So that was from the designer to his people to keep them healthy.
Right,
And there's several things that was in his law that was designed, that goes along with his design to keep his people healthy.
right. And that's, one of those sections we'll get to in a few weeks is, maybe next week, is deals with, there's a lot of science that was shown in the Bible long before man lived.
Yeah.
You know, we've discovered that your blood clots on the 8th day. We can look at a lot of things that the Bible stated, and back then, they had no clue, some of the rules on what they were to eat was long before before people had determined that, you can get sick from uncooked pork or whatever. It's just,
Well, yeah, just even pork not taken care of properly back then, salt was the only way you had to preserve anything. Which you can salt pork, but you gotta know what you're doing.
right,
And they were more of a fish and lamb diet anyway.
right.
But the main thing was the brucellosis,
Yeah, I think that's right.
that was within pork, or that is within pork. And having to know how to deal with that.
Mhm. Right, so they had rules that helped them deal with human, health and safety long before they knew what it was doing for them. Pretty neat stuff. Any other comments before we get into the pain and suffering? I'm sure y'all are ready for suffering, right? So, people talk about pain and suffering, you think about, 911, you had airplanes crash into the towers, and some people are like, why did God let that happen? There's some of our friends that would try to argue that God is not, if God was a loving God, if God was a mighty God, He wouldn't let that happen. That's a tough question, and they basically will make the point that, you'll say your God's all things are possible, God is almighty, but then they're using, basically that comes from the Bible, but they don't want to use the Bible to then go on and go, well, what's the difference here? What's God's plan for the earth? And to me, that's kind of the basis of this whole topic. Because God could have, if you want to have this plan where there is no pain or suffering at all on earth, you need to think hard about that plan if you don't want bad things to happen. God has a plan for earth, and it includes pain and suffering for this, which were our temporary time on earth. And that's what we want to look at today, is that God does have a plan. It's not like He did not, and this all just surprised Him. So as we look at God's plan, God's love, the basics of His plan is we have free will. God allows us to make choice, freedom of choice. So the person that crashed the airplane was allowed to make that bad choice. Now some people, and I think this is a bit extreme, some people would argue that, because they'll go, well, why do bad things happen to good people? So-and-so, he's a good Christian guy. Why do bad things happen to good people? And it seems like sometimes bad people get away with stuff. Of course, one could argue that we all sin and fall short. And so are we really good people? Are we, We look at good differently than God does. And we do see from Genesis 17:1, where it says, when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty, walk before me and be blameless. So God is Almighty. And in Matthew, in the New Testament, we turn around and we see, but Jesus looked at them and said, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. So we see back in Genesis chapter 2, we see the beginning of the plan. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in that day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Okay, and we know that this was spiritual death. It wasn't like they took, like it was poisonous and they took a bite and dropped dead. It was spiritual death. This was the beginning of man falling away and sinning, and there were consequences to that. And one of those consequences was more pain and suffering. So the sin of Adam and Eve was the start of pain and suffering. Was this a surprise to God? No, God knew where this was all headed. And we think about, well, because he had the plan of salvation from the start. So that's all, it all works together. Joshua 24:15, this is where, in the end of Joshua, where he's like, he's going to make that statement about, I'm going to serve the Lord, right? 24:15 tells us, and if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So before they were in the promised land, they were in an area where they didn't serve the true God. That's what that was about, the gods of their fathers. Before Abraham, it was like they weren't Jews. So they served different gods, and then the people of the land there served different gods. But Joshua's like, you need to make this choice to serve the true God. So God gives us a choice to serve him. He's given everyone else that choice, and some people choose to do good, some bad.
Sometimes we don't understand why we get trials and tribulations, but it makes us stronger in our faith.
Mhm.
It either makes us drop away or it makes us stronger. There's no middle ground in there.
Right. We're growing or we're kind of sliding, slipping away. God wants us to love him and make that choice to love him. He doesn't make us love him. He doesn't make us like little robots doing good things and walking around just smiling, and that's not his plan. His plan.
If you look at that too, a lot of times we call them trials and tribulations, but how much of them are of our own making?
How much what?
How much of them are of our own making? I mean, our own choices. That goes along with free will.
Right.
He's been sick. The guy gets sick with a bad health problem. But it may be from a job that he chose to take that had something there at that plant that was that would cause a chronic illness later on. Or it was a choice that he made as a young person to smoke. Or it's not God giving us that. I mean, there's consequences for every action.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the laws of nature. For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. A lot of times we call things trials, but they're, like I said, a lot of them are our own making.
Right.
Our own decisions. That we have chosen to do this, And when we chose to do this, here's the opposite reaction for doing that.
Right, there's consequences. It's not all about, and we'll get into this, it's not all about Adam's sin.
No,
Someone can sin now, you know, someone is an alcoholic and they can destroy their family, they can go out here and have a car wreck, and there's pain and suffering from all of that choice. So, great point. Great
now for the
point.
one that was in the car wreck with him, the person that he hit, I mean, there's a never-ending process to it. I mean, he chose to go down that road that day, but at the same time, for his family, it's a trial to test, or it's an opportunity for them to see who they're gonna lean on at that point.
Mhm.
I mean, and it's not,
And it's suffering for the other
it's
person.
suffering for that family, but it's also an opportunity for that family to see who if they're gonna lean on God, or if they're gonna blame God, or, I mean, it's just, there's so much flow with everything. And
Right.
that still points to a designer. It's not a this and that's it. It's everything flows from one action.
Right, there can be negative consequences to you for someone else's sin,
Yep.
or you can have consequences because you sin. It can go either way.
And in that process, it can continue on until there is a positive outcome from all of it.
Mhm.
So it's just that,
We don't see the long,
yeah,
the long.
I mean, that goes back to God has a plan. It's his plan. It's not our plan. It's his plan.
Right,
And we don't see what he
Big picture.
sees.
The big picture. And,
Right.
heaven is eternal, earth is not. In heaven, there's no sin, on earth there is. And the ones that are trying to do right and obey God, death is not,
Not a problem.
not a, what, death is not, I don't know the
yeah,
word.
you're looking ahead, we'll get there.
You know, like he said, the van hit another car. But when you make choices, it may not be, God has a plan for you. But whether you finish that plan, you may take all these side trails along the way, what they call shortcut long cuts, to get to it. And you may eventually finish that plan, but it may take you years to get to where you need to be.
Right,
I was gonna say, death is not a, get it out. It's not the worst thing that could happen to you because you're ready for God, to be with God.
for a Christian.
It may, the separation from earth and family here would make them sad, but knowing that they were Christian is a relief,
The people left behind are the only ones that suffer.
suffering.
Mhm. So as we look at this, it tells us in Matthew 5, and we got about 5 minutes to go, that he makes the sun rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the just and the unjust. Everyone basically gets treated the same. We do know that at the beginning, when the earth was created, it tells us in Genesis 1, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. What God created was very good. Of course, this was before the fall. And then we see pain enter the world after the fall of man, Genesis 3:17. And to Adam he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. So much of the suffering we have in this world is from sins, either ours or others. And then we see though that in Romans 5:18, therefore as one trespass led to condemnation for all men, so one act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all men. So we know that God had a plan, and that plan is right there. Yeah, Adam was gonna lead us into sin, God already knew that, and Jesus is going to lead us to salvation. So we have a plan that God laid out. And we've already talked about pain and suffering. Natural laws can cause that. You fall off the building, and the natural laws of science says you're gonna hit the ground hard and probably get hurt. Not all pain is bad. If you think about it, if you feel a heart attack and you go to the hospital, it can save your life. If you touch, you barely touch a hot stove and you jerk back, if you didn't feel that pain, you could put your hand on it and destroy your finger. So there's some pain that's good. Not all pain is logical and like that, okay? Sometimes we don't see the short-term benefits. There was a Nobel laureate, Stephen Weinberg, that said, I have to admit that sometimes nature seems more beautiful than strictly necessary. Outside the window of my home office, there's a hackberry tree visited frequently by a convocation of politic birds, blue jays, yellow-throated vireos, and loveliest of all, an occasional red cardinal. Although I understand pretty well how brightly colored feathers evolved out of competition for mates, it is almost irresistible to imagine that all the beauty was somehow laid out for our benefit. But the God of birds and trees would have to be also the God of birth defects and cancer. And he goes on about, is there a God that has a special plan for humans? And we do know he has a special plan. I also thought it's interesting because here's this evolution guy, and he goes on about, and he's critical of birth defects. And you're going, wait a minute, your plan of evolution requires that you have these, what we would typically find as birth defects. You have to make the plan of evolution work, you have to have people come out that are different, mutations, what they would say. And what they don't get is that 99% of mutations are bad, but they don't talk about that. So in the bigger picture, I know that's not the part for today, but we need to understand that. And I know we're gonna run out of time, but we do know that Jesus suffered for us. He's for our salvation, Hebrews 2:9-10. But we see him who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, shall make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. So our salvation was perfected through Jesus' suffering. There's some other scriptures there that you can look at. I really appreciate all the comments today. It's been a good class. And we're